There has been a lot of focus on elections at the top of the ticket this year in Florida. The presidential race, races for U.S. Senate and Congress, the constitutional amendments that would overturn Florida's near total ban on abortion and legalize recreational marijuana in the state. But there are a whole bunch of fascinating local races across Florida, too. And we're going to get into a couple of them today. And in doing so, we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most important issues facing Florida right now, the state's increasingly unaffordable housing market, one that has left homeownership beyond the reach of so many Floridians. As you'll see in just a sec, there are actually a lot of solutions out there. We just need elected officials with the will to make them happen. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to Seeking Rents, the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garcia. I am the publisher of Seeking Rents. That's a newsletter and podcast in Florida about state politics, but with a particular emphasis on the ways big businesses and other special interests influence public policy in this state. That name, Seeking Rents, comes from a term in economics called rent seeking. And rent seeking is what's happening when someone with lots of wealth and influence, like a big business or a billionaire, uses that wealth and influence to get laws changed in their favor in a way that allows them to capture even more wealth and influence for themselves, usually at the expense of someone else. So we've got a twofer on today's show. My first guest is Eric Grimmer. He's the Orlando lead for YIMBY, which stands for Yes in My Backyard, and is a group that advocates for higher density development and what I thought Eric so eloquently called housing abundance. Eric is also one of the lead organizers behind a couple of really important ballot measures on the ballot this year in Orange County, which is where I live, which is where the city of Orlando is. These two ballot measures together would create new protections for the county's rural areas that would both make it harder to develop rural land and thereby discourage or slow suburban sprawl, but also encourage higher density urban development. After Eric, my guest will be Bryan Eastman, who is a city commissioner in Gainesville and who's involved with another really interesting and important local ballot measure up there, one in which the residents, the people of Gainesville, may actually take control of their public power company back after it was essentially seized by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and the Republican-controlled legislature. You know, I actually initially reached out to these guys because I wanted to, lift up these local referendums, because I think they're really interesting and they're sort of emblematic of just how important local elections can be in Florida. But the conversation actually these conversations ended up having a lot more in common than I initially expected, because in both cases, we ended up getting into something I've been trying to think a lot more intentionally about. And that's like proactive ways to address housing affordability in Florida, particularly by chiseling away at outdated, old-fashioned, and overly restrictive zoning laws that constrain the supply of housing, and in doing so, drive up the cost of homes. I hope you'll enjoy both conversations. They really are fascinating, and they connect to each other in a number of different ways. But first, as always, please remember to click the like and subscribe buttons so you never miss one of our shows. And as you listen to this, if anything spurs any thoughts or ideas, please make sure to leave a comment about it too. I promise you we read them. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get right to it. We'll start with Eric Grimmer. Eric Grimmer, welcome to the show.
Jason, it's an honor to be here. Before we get started, I just want to say, huge fan of yours, both of your podcast work, but also your written column. So it is really, really an honor to be with you here today and speak to you.
Oh man, that's incredibly kind. The check is in the mail.
I am a paid subscriber.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I want you to keep doing what you're doing.
That's really kind. That really does mean a lot. That's awesome. So one of the things I wanted to chat with you about, you are a guy that, if I understand right, you played a leading role in this rural boundary, these couple of charter amendment petitions that are on the ballot here in Orange County, where we are. And, I've got a lot of readers that are in the Orlando area, but others in different parts of the state. So I'm wondering if maybe you could just sort of walk through what are the rural boundary amendments on the ballot, and sort of how did we get there? Because it was sort of a convoluted process.
Sure, absolutely. I'll say I played a role in that process. So I had the honor of serving on the Charter Review Commission for Orange County in 2024. And what the Charter Review Commission is, it's a citizen-led panel that's paneled every 4 years to look at the Orange County Charter, and the charter is like our county constitution. We examine the charter, look for ways that it can be improved. We hold public meetings. We had public meetings for over a year in which we're open to the public. People could come in, offer their own ideas on ways the county government can be improved and improve the lives of its citizens. And one of the ideas that was brought to us as a Charter Review Commission was the idea of a rural boundary. And the Orange County Charter Review Commission is really unique in charter counties in Florida, because a lot of counties do have a charter review commission, but a lot of them, if they want to suggest an amendment to the county charter, it has to be approved by that county's board of county commissioners. But Orange County, we actually have the authority to put it directly on the ballot for people to vote on if we think there is a change to the charter that is warranted. And so it's really like one of the most direct forms of democracy that we have here. So it's really interesting that way. So one of the ideas that was brought to us at the CRC was the idea of a rural boundary. And I have to give credit, it was brought to us by Dr. Kelly Samrad, who is now a candidate for the county commission in District 5, and also UCF tourism expert and professor as well. And so what the proposal for the rural boundary was is, everyone knows here in Orange County and Central Florida, and really most of the entire country, we've kind of developed our communities, and we call it suburban sprawl. And that's a big problem here in Orange County, for a number of reasons, which we can get into. But what the rural boundary is trying to do is trying to put a check on that suburban sprawl. And so what the proposal was, that the county kind of has an urban service area in its county comprehensive plan, which
what does an urban service area mean for folks?
So an urban service area for the county comprehensive plan, it's an idea that this is where a lot of the housing, a lot of our commercial, a lot of our educational institutions are going to be built. We're going to provide services here. We're going to have all the infrastructure we need to service all those buildings. And so these are the places we should really focus on development. And then we also have what's called a rural service area, which is everything outside that, right? Where you're going to have, it's going to be less developed. You're going to have, agriculture. You're going to have, bigger homes, farms, those kinds of things. And what comes out, you're going to have less infrastructure and less services. It's just kind of how it's designed. But even though we've had an urban service area in Orange County for at least the past 30 years, it's kind of really been very malleable about how we're going to develop inside and outside that. The urban service area has moved bunches of times, whether it's through the request of a developer who wants to build some housing or some other kind of property, outside the urban service area, or at the request of the county government that they want to bring in some additional area into the urban service area to develop. So it's really we've had a boundary, but it's really been subject to kind of the whims of the county commission that could bring things into the urban service area, or develop outside the urban service area. Really, a simple majority vote of the county commission. So what the rural boundary was trying to accomplish is giving some teeth to that urban service area map. It would not stop the idea of suburban sprawl in Orange County, but the idea is to make it a little more difficult. So I mentioned before, most of the votes on which they could change the urban service area map or do urban style development in the rural area would just require a simple majority vote. But under the rural boundary proposal, it actually would require a majority plus one vote of the county commission. So again, would not stop suburban sprawl, but hopefully it would force the county commission to at least give a little more thought and kind of heighten that voting threshold to kind of maybe slow some of that suburban sprawl that we're seeing here.
That makes sense. I was just going to say too, like to folks that sort of don't pay attention to local politics, like even adding that one extra vote is a really significant deal, because some of those developments that have been happening outside of the urban service boundary, those tend to be like wars fought on the county commission, right? Those are often 4-3 votes, right? So upping that requirement is a big deal.
Yeah, we just saw that recently here at the county commission in the past year with Subsidy, this project that was proposed on the east side of the county where I live. It's been trying to be approved basically by the past 10 years by this developer. And we're talking about the rural east side of the county, that's very rural, large lots, very agriculturally heavy, but trying to propose a more, suburban style development. And the residents out there have been, fighting this for years. And it just came to the county commission in the past year, and over 100 speakers came to the county commission to speak on, again, mostly against it, and in my opinion, for very good reason. And the county commission went past midnight, in the conversation. And it was eventually, was a no vote, but I believe it was 4-3. So that's a great example of some of
Right.
the, of some of the battles that are being fought to preserve, what rural area we have left in Orange County.
Right, right. And I think you'll probably know better, but like for instance, in a 4-3 vote scenario, three county commissioners on the ballot this year were all on the for side of this. So like you flip one of those, and suddenly you've got your project approved, right? If you're in a 4-3 scenario.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why, this coming election, just like most of our elections, like are so important because we
Right.
have some of the, a couple of county commissioners, one, Nicole Wilson, who's on the ballot for re-election, is one of the biggest defenders, our natural lands of doing good, development here in Orange County. And then Emily Bonilla, who is the county commissioner out here on the east side, she is terming out. And Dr. Kelly Semrad, who I mentioned earlier, is running to take that spot, and she is a resident of the rural East as well, and has been a big defender of keeping that role here. So, yeah, these local elections that are coming up are extremely important for these type of votes.
Yeah. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you too, as you were working on that process, I think you walked us through sort of working on it on the Charter Review Commission, and you and I have chatted about this before. But then the Florida legislature tried to sort of Bigfoot this issue. Can you just sort of tell me about sort of like as someone who was on the ground trying to get this done, sort of watching that play out, and sort of how if at all that influenced sort of how you guys thought about it and where you guys went with the work product you were trying to put together?
Yeah, so an important thing to remember about this is that it was not done willy-nilly by the Charter Review Commission.
Right.
Once it was proposed by Dr. Semra, we voted into one of our committees, which was the Sustainable Growth Committee, which I was actually the chairperson of. And we studied this issue for over a year. We talked extensively with our county staff, about some of these some of these urban, principles, the urban service area, and other things that are in the county comprehensive plan that kind of governs how we develop in Orange County. We talked to Commissioner Lee Constantine of Seminole County. They have their
Right.
own rural boundary there. They've had it over 20 years, and it's been extremely successful for Seminole County. So we talked to, and also a former county commissioner there, Randall Morris, we also spoke to about how they went and got, their rural boundary approved and what maybe they could improve, what they would have improved upon, what they're trying to do there. And we also heard a lot from representatives of our Orange County municipalities as well. So we really studied this issue quite a bit for over a year. And you mentioned that kind of at the 11th hour, the Florida legislature came in. A state senator from Spring Hill,
A home builder, by
proposed,
the way.
yes, proposed,
Blazing Golia for anybody
yeah,
listening.
Blazing Golia, right. He proposed kind of a last minute amendment to a bipartisan Department of Commerce bill that basically said no citizen led board could propose any sort of charter amendment that did exactly what we were trying to do.
Right.
And in the floor debate at the state Senate on this issue, Senator Goy was asked directly if this was directed at Orange County and the Charter Review Commission, and he confirmed that it was.
Right.
And unfortunately, that amendment passed and that bill was passed and signed by the governor. It was unfortunate that it was a bipartisan bill. So some of our own Orange County representation actually voted for that bill that preempted its own
Right.
Charter Review Commission, which was disappointing to me personally. But I also understood it somewhat, considering it was part of a much larger bill. But when
let me just
sure.
stop in and jump in because I want to emphasize a couple of points for folks. Like you made a important emphasis on how much time you had spent studying this, how much testimony you heard. You spent, if I heard you right, the Charter Review Commission in Orange County spent more than a year working on this proposal. And then just before it can get to the point where it's about to finish the work, the Florida legislature comes in and on the floor of the Florida Senate. So at literally the last minute is where they decide to step in Bigfoot. And then, we got records later that showed this was all driven, of course, by the giant real estate development lobby. And to your point, it was asked on the floor if this was about Orange County. They said that Goldie acknowledged yes. And then every one of Orange County's senators voted for it except for one, and that's Victor Torres. I'm going off memory, but Victor Torres, I think, voted against it. But Linda Stewart, who's running for county commission now, voted for it. Jason Broder voted for it. Dennis Baxley voted for it. Oh, no. Victor Torres voted. It was Geraldine Thompson.
Geraldine Thompson was the
that's
one.
right.
Yeah, the one lone holdout.
Yeah, Geraldine, I'm so sorry. I owe you an apology. And Victor Torres, what were you thinking? Okay, so I just wanted to emphasize this idea that you guys spent so much time doing it, and the legislature, as soon as a lobbyist comes running, within minutes, basically, is acting on this.
So tell
Yeah,
me what happened next. Oh, go
and
ahead.
it's also an important exercise. Not only do we study it a lot, but it was something that has been supported on by the members of the public pretty much from the beginning.
Right.
As a charter review commission, we held public meetings in every single district in Orange County, and where people will come, like I mentioned, people come and deliver public comments and talk about the things they thought needed improvement. And every one of them, in every single district, we heard complaints of issues related to kind of the detrimental impacts of suburban sprawl, whether that be traffic congestion, whether that be stormwater management issues, all the things we're experiencing here in Orange County that are related to our suburban sprawl problem. And ever since it's been formally proposed by Dr. Samarad, the public is, I would say, almost universally in favor of it, right? So once that preemption came down from the state, it was very infuriating for me as someone who had spent a long time working on this, but also kind of proud at the same time. I gotta be honest with you. Like I just got preempted by the state of Florida. Like, did I just make it? Like, this little old me, this regular guy who just got preempted. So it's kind of
you're on somebody's list now.
Yeah. So it's not like, oh, someone's paying attention to what we're doing here. So it was kind of funny though. But yeah, obviously, very disappointing to have that happen to us. But you know what? We didn't let that stop us, because though the Charter Review Commission was preempted from doing that, who wasn't preempted by that state law? It was our own Board of County Commission.
Right.
So what we did is we pivoted. We said as a Charter Review Commission, okay, we can't do that, but let's go ahead and let's ask the Orange County Board of County Commissioners to do it for us. So we passed a resolution as a Charter Review Commission, asking the BCC to take this on themselves. And to their great credit, they did that. Immediately, and they unanimously put the rule boundary on the ballot for the people of Orange County to vote on, and getting around that preemption that tried to keep us from doing it.
That makes sense. And so walk us through what's on the ballot, because the way I've been thinking about it, and tell me if this is right or wrong, but that there's one amendment that says rural boundary, but it's really two amendments. They're two related amendments. And what are those two, and what are the difference between the two?
Yeah, so one is the rural boundary, which we've been talking about. The other one has to do with municipal annexations. And this was originally part of the rural boundary proposal that was being considered by the CRC as well. And just to touch on briefly what annexations are, when you're talking about land that's in unincorporated Orange County, so not in the city of Orlando, not in the city of Winter Garden, not in Maitland, property owners can ask municipalities to take their property out of unincorporated Orange County and become part of that municipality, and then to be subject to all the rules and regulations, pertaining to that municipality. And the Florida statutes that govern annexations that are being asked for by property owners are very favorable to annexation. There's really not a whole lot the county can do. And a lot of times those annexation requests are basically forum shopping, right? Property owners who maybe are looking to develop their property are trying to avoid some of the county's regulations, especially regarding the environment. The county hasn't had a great track record of environmental protection, but it has done some really great things in the past couple of years. They passed an overhaul of their wetlands ordinance, which made it one of the strongest in the state. There's also a tree removal ordinance that's been passed by the board. So they really are trying to address some of their missteps of the past. So a lot of times these annexations are trying to avoid those kind of regulations that maybe municipalities might not have. So originally in the rural boundary proposal was a piece about annexations. And that said, if land was in unincorporated Orange County and then was later annexed into a municipality, and that land was in the rural area as defined by the rural boundary, the municipality would still have to apply the county's land use regulations. And basically that's just, again, to discourage that forum shopping. Right. It doesn't give them any benefit to leave the county and go into that municipality if they're looking to avoid those regulations.
Right.
Now, when the Board of County Commission took that up, Commissioner Bonilla wanted to make that actually a stronger portion. And instead of just applying that municipal annexations to just land that's in the rural area, wanted to make it countywide and make it even stronger to give the county some authority over all the municipal annexations that have been occurring here. So those are the two things on your ballot. One that's rural boundary and one that's devoted to municipal annexation specifically.
That makes sense. The way I've come to think of it, I think I'm stealing this language from Kelly Semerad, but tell me this. But basically, you've got the First Amendment creates a rural boundary and designates all the land, and the other is basically the teeth behind it that stops a developer or a landowner from getting out of the rural boundary just by having a city like the city of Orlando, which is willing to swallow 50,000 acres or 500,000 acres of ranch land in one go, just by having them come along and annex it. Is that the right way to think about it, you
Yeah,
think?
I mean, that's exactly right. And instead of, well, I'm not even going to worry about a majority plus one vote at the county commission to get my land use change. I'm just going to leave Orange County and go into the city of Orlando. So yeah, exactly. It's important to have both those elements to this proposal to really give it some strength and teeth.
That makes sense. And so, if I'm understanding the annexation one too, what it basically does is it requires any annexation to also be approved by a majority plus one of the county commission. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Okay.
I think believe the majority one plus one applies that too, and it really just provides a procedure,
Right.
for annexation that doesn't really exist at this time. And Orange County is given that authority by the Constitution of the state of Florida to do this. And it's become really, we've seen in the past year, why it has become so important, as you kind of referenced, all the land that's being annexed from Southeast Orange County
Right.
into the city of Orlando, including the Desert Ranch property, a portion of it, 50,000 acres. That's 30 to 40 miles away from the city of Orlando. They're
Right.
trying to make it part of the city of Orlando.
Right.
And I personally have a lot of concerns with that as a resident of East Orange County, but that's just as a, resident of Central Florida. I worry about the ability of the city of Orlando, to provide, effective
Right.
oversight and services to parcels of land that are 30, 40 minutes away, 30 to 40 miles away from, you know, the downtown area. And the downtown and the city of Orlando has issues that they're focusing on in the downtown area. And I think that's what they should be focusing on. They should be focused on servicing the residents they have, not worrying about land that's 40 miles away. It's 50,000 acres.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I said 500,000 acres. I was thinking of all of Desert's land, but it's
Right.
50,000. And you're right. I was looking at a map when I was writing about this, and this land it's closer to the St. Johns River than it is to City Hall, right? Like that's how far out there this land is.
That's exactly right. And I mean, you're right. And it's just a huge part of Central Florida. It's on the east, all the way up to like southern Brevard County down to
Right.
Osceola County. Like it's just a
Right.
huge swath of land. And this is only just 50,000 acres of that. But I would anticipate if this annexation is successful, we're going to start seeing
Yeah.
additional annexations on top of that. And even the city of Orlando even getting even bigger. And just this one annexation they're considering would make it 2/3 bigger of the city of
Right.
Orlando. So it's really just a huge swath. And, I just don't think it's a good idea from, a planning perspective for the city of Orlando to do that.
Yeah, and let me give me sort of the pitch for why this is important. Like what, you know, yeah, obviously, I think people generally sort of like the idea of saving rural lands and stopping sprawl, but beyond just sort of that kind of emotional appeal, why is this sort of thing important and how does it sort of factor in with smart growth?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be worried about the city of Orlando's ability to provide effective oversight over the development of this land, considering its distance from the city core.
Hmm.
And most of this land, contrary to some other annexations that we've seen, where the land already has like suburban style entitlements, most of this land is still zoned agricultural, right? So at some point, they're going to be asking for entitlements to do development on this land. And I mentioned annexations being like a forum shopping type activity. And as of right now, the city of Orlando doesn't even have an environmental protection division.
Right.
Uh, so we have a huge environmental protection division in Orange County. We have these new ordinances that are trying to provide better oversight and do a more sustainable development. And so now we have land that's trying to get into the city of Orlando that doesn't have these, stringent environmental regulations and doesn't even have a department in which to enforce its current regulations.
Right.
So I worry about it just be, very difficult for them to provide any sort of effective oversight and enforcement as well, because that's a big thing as well. You have to be able to enforce the
Right.
regulations you have, not just have the regulations. And
That
also,
makes sense.
I just think that the city of Orlando needs to focus on, the city of Orlando. There's certainly room for improvements to be made there. And they are actually, Buddy Dyer had the state of the city, this week. And he had some really great ideas, I thought, about ways that they're trying to improve the city. I'm like, Buddy, that's a great idea. Let's focus on that. You don't need to be worrying about
Right.
land in Southeast Orange County. Let's make the city of Orlando, one of the crown jewels of the state of Florida.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so Orange County, and how does this affect good development? Orange County has, again, not the greatest track record in terms of doing good development, but we are trying to get better. I mentioned some of the environmental protections that we have now. We're also in the middle of updating our comprehensive plan and our land development code. That's going to be, directing development and directing all the new residents we know we have coming to Orange County into places where the jobs are and places where we already are. So that's the I-Drive corridor, that's around UCF. Instead of willy-nilly developing all over the county and what undeveloped land we have left, let's put these people in places where we already have infrastructure, where we already have, somewhat of a transit system that hopefully we can expand in the future. Yeah. And so if Orange County is trying to do better and we're including these lands in the areas in which are in unincorporated Orange County in that planning process, it really affects the county's ability to do that better kind of planning that it is trying to do. Yeah. So it's one of the parcels, that was annexed earlier in the year, the Sunbridge property that's in East Orange County as well. I mentioned earlier, that already has its own entitlements for suburban style development. And the county's been working on that since 2016, right? So now that becomes the city of Orlando. At this point, the county is challenging, but all that work that the county has done, all that man hours they put into planning, that's all down the drain at this point. So it really affects the county's ability to plan effectively and to do its work effectively for its citizens.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're starting to touch on the other thing I want to ask you. You're obviously you're a leader with YIMBY. I think I've described myself in the past. I've been fully like YIMBY pilled at this point that I sort of really
Welcome.
Yeah, that's right. I'm so happy to be here. The logic of we need more housing, we need more dense housing, we need all this stuff. We need to loosen sort of zoning restrictions. That all makes total sense to me. And it is also sort of complicated, like, writing about this for me, or also there was some legislation that passed this year that essentially it was written by Lennar, the giant home builder, that allowed it to essentially throw up subdivisions faster and cheaper. But even as I was writing about that, I was kind of like grossed out at the process, but I had trouble getting too worked up about the policy itself, only in the sense that I'm thinking, well, we do want more housing. And so what I'm leading to here is, how do you sort of reconcile or balance, like, a rural boundary is, in effect, it makes development harder in a certain area. How does that sort of balance with kind of the YIMBY mindset of trying to make it easier to develop and build and stuff like that? How do those two pieces fit together in your mind?
Yeah, so at YIMBY, our primary objective, I would say, is housing abundance. Everyone knows we have a nationwide housing affordability crisis. And the data has clearly shown us at this point that affordability crisis is primarily based on an imbalance between supply and demand of homes. We just don't have enough homes for our citizens and the people who need them. So we, as an organization, our primary goal is increasing that housing supply.
Right.
But Orlando YIMBY and myself, we have taken a position that we don't want to continue the suburban sprawl development patterns of the past, because we see where that has gotten us as a nation and as a county. Our housing affordability is not any better by the fact that we build housing all over the county, right? It's still extremely unaffordable. And we have all the negative downstream effects of suburban sprawl. We have traffic congestion. We have stormwater management issues that are getting worse by the day and by the storm. It's and our municipal balance sheet is in dire straits in the sense that we have a $22 billion deficit in transportation projects, in the county, because when you do suburban sprawl, it does not pay for itself.
Right. You
do not get enough tax revenue from that sprawl, especially when you're thinking the state of Florida, and these are detached single family homes that have a homestead exemption that's going to cap the property taxes that people are paying. You just don't have enough to maintain and repair all the infrastructure that's required for suburban sprawl. So, you see the kind of deficits in infrastructure that we have in Orange County. So at Orlando YIMBY, we have taken the position that even though we want housing abundance, we want the right kind of housing abundance. We want to build where we already are. We want to build up. We don't want to build out, which is what we've been doing. We want to build where we already have the infrastructure. We want to build where we have a transit system that we want to expand, that we had advocated for expansion of. We were supporters of the transportation sales tax in 2022. We are supporters of the Sunshine Corridor that would expand Brightline and Sunrail here locally. So we are anti-suburban sprawl. We believe that we have the space where we already are to solve the housing crisis. We just need to develop our communities in a different way. So we believe in growth and development, but we believe in smart growth, and suburban sprawl is not smart growth. So that is why I supported the rural boundary, I know, as an individual and as a member of the CRC, and why Orlando YIMBY has supported it also from the beginning and will continue to support it as it is on the ballot in a few weeks.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let me ask you, sort of like thinking more proactively on that housing abundance piece of the equation. What are, world according to Eric, if you could like wave a wand and you're sort of in charge of Florida, what are some of the policies that we could pass that would sort of really help with the housing abundance problem?
Well, I wish I had my YIMBY shown today because it has a graphic on there. And what it says is legalized housing,
Right.
right? And what we mean by that is in the United States of America, in land that is zoned for residential, and 70% of that land, it is illegal to build anything but a detached single family home.
Right.
Right. So when we say legalize housing, we say legalize more options for more housing, because there's nothing wrong with detached single family housing. But we do know at this point, we have to acknowledge that it is the most expensive form of housing that we have. It's most expensive for people to buy. It's the most expensive in terms of the land that it requires and the resources it takes to build that. It's the most expensive for builders to construct. And it requires the most infrastructure for our governments to build and maintain. Right. So we do have to acknowledge the costs associated with that. So when we say legalize housing, it's like give people more options of other places to live. And when some people, when they think of housing, either think of detached single family homes or they think of giant 35-story towers, right?
Right.
To them, there's no in between. But
Right.
that's not how we see it. We see like places where, well, why can't you just build townhouses anywhere you want instead of detached single homes? Why can't you build duplexes? Those kinds of what we call the missing middle. There's something in between the detached single family and the large towers, small courtyard apartments, 6 units, those kinds of things that if you look at them, they can really fit in nicely with the character of existing suburban neighborhoods and really give it that kind of personality. So it's loosening those restrictions on what type of housing that can be built in our residential areas. It's loosening the restrictions on, we have all sorts of restrictions on, how wide those lots must be that you're building on, right? And if you have wide lot restrictions, there's only so much land at which you can build housing. So if you have smaller lot size restrictions, you can build more housing. We have, parking requirements associated with both our residential and commercial, parking minimum requirements that are arbitrary and based on really no existing data and science behind it. And that takes up wide swaths of land that for the most part is not used.
Right.
And it goes to waste, especially when that land is in our urban core and it's devoted to parking that is mostly, empty most of the time. And so we look to eliminate parking minimums as a way to use our scarce land more effectively. Not eliminating parking, but just eliminating the arbitrary requirements that are set by the government and they don't take into the context of the particular situation. We think the people that are constructing either that housing or that commercial development know better what kind of parking they need to make their project most successful. So it's kind of loosening some of those restrictions that allow for more natural development and allow for more, dense, affordable living.
Right. Is there any place, are we seeing any advances in this kind of thing? Like, I don't know. I'm curious if you've got a perspective. Like, obviously, the state made a big push on live local last year. I'm curious what you think of that, or are there places around the state that are making advances in this kind of legalizing housing approach?
Yeah, so Live Local was interesting because it was when first passed, it was pitched as an affordable housing bill. But then you take a look at how the state statutes define affordable housing, and it's 120% of the area median income, which is really not affordable.
Right.
And the capital A affordable as housing and urban Department of Housing and Urban Development defines affordability. Like 100 in a lot of places, 120% AMI is almost market rate.
Right.
So it's really not an affordable housing bill, but as I started, I'm like, you know what, this is actually a YIMBY bill
Oh,
because
interesting.
it just allows more housing to be built in areas that are zoned commercial or industrial
Right.
without some of that bureaucratic red tape that's slowing down housing production. So at the time when it came out, I was kind of excited to see that, and I was really excited to see the state of Florida kind of take on this issue directly. But so far, at least locally, I haven't seen, much effects of it. I know there's been some live local projects more proposed in the city of Orlando. I'm not sure where they are in the pipeline. There's really been none in Orange County
Oh,
that have made
wow.
it past an application. Yeah. I know there's been a couple that submitted an application or had a pre-application meeting, but really haven't gone any further than that. And I'm curious to see it as live local, assuming it continues on in state statute, how things change. Because is it just the market? Construction costs are so high right now that just not much is getting built at all. Financing costs are so high with the interest rates. So is that what's slowing down the production? I'll be interested to see, as the rates go down and as our costs become more controlled, whether live local has an effect. But in terms of other places in the state of Florida that are doing well, so look at like Gainesville, and they're doing some really interesting things in the past couple of years. They've loosened some of their restrictions on that, single family only zoning, allowing more, housing types to be built in places that were traditionally limited to only single family homes. They've reduced some of those, lot size restrictions that allow for more units to be built. They have addressed parking minimums and I think they've eliminated their parking minimums
Oh,
in
wow.
Gainesville. Again, allowing more content sensitive development to occur and allowing the market and allowing developers to decide how much parking they need instead of just mandating it, at an arbitrary level. So they are doing some interesting things as well. Also, the city of St. Pete, I think, is doing some really good stuff, building a ton of housing, exactly where they should be, which is in their downtown core, building tall, dense housing. And unfortunately, they had one of the issues with the hurricane. I don't know if you saw, Jason, that they had a crane from under construction.
Yeah, that's right. Right on the
hit a
Tampa Bay
building.
Times. It hit one of my old offices.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Which was, obviously it's really unfortunate, that happened. But I talked with, they have their own chapter of YIMBY St. Pete. And I talked with one of the members, and like in terms of the downtown core, like, it did very well in terms of the storm surge and everything, because they're building that kind of dense, tall housing, that we need in that downtown area. They've done a lot into investing into their local transit system, into their Sunrun. They have a bus rapid transit system down there that I'm extremely jealous of. So there are some municipalities in Florida that are doing some really forward-thinking things and trying to get Orange County to follow in those footsteps. And I mentioned Vision 2050 and Orange Code earlier, our updates to our comprehensive plan and our land development code. If we get those adopted, which are still working their way through the process at the county, I think those will be, big improvements over our current situation.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm hoping to actually have someone from Gainesville on the podcast soon, so we'll make sure to ask him about that if that happens. So
I'll make sure to listen to that, because
yeah.
I'm really impressed with what they're doing up there.
Yeah. Well, listen, this was fascinating, and it was really helpful for me because like I said, I've been in my mind sort of struggling a little bit with I'm on Team Rural Boundary, partially because I sort of trust most of the people behind it. But it's helpful to get a better explanation of sort of how it fits into the larger YIMBY picture. So thanks for doing
Yeah,
that.
and let me tell you, Jason, I'm happy that you're on board with YIMBY, but like they go hand in hand, right? We
Yeah.
can build more housing without paving over what we have left in terms of our natural lands in Orange County. We can provide housing and keep those rural areas at the same time. We just have to do it the right way.
I've spent too much time over my life talking to development lobbyists, I think. That's part of this. Well, listen, Eric, thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Jason, this was awesome. Love the conversation. I love to have you again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you soon.
Hey, thank you again to Eric Grimmer. I will make sure to post a link in the show notes to Orlando YIMBY's website so you can get a better sense of what they're about and what they advocate for. And with that, let's dive straight into talk number 2, this time with Gainesville City Commissioner Bryan Eastman. Bryan Eastman, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Excited to be here. I've been a big fan of yours for a while, following you on Twitter, reading your Substack. And so, yeah, I'm excited to talk with you, about the issues that we have going on in Gainesville.
Well, that's really kind of you. I appreciate that. Well, one of the reasons, this, I wanted to have you on the show was to talk about a really important ballot measure up in Gainesville. Part of what I'm doing, I just actually recorded an interview with a friend down here in Orange County. He's very involved with a ballot measure, a local charter amendment to create a rural boundary and slow suburban sprawl in Orange County. But you guys have a really interesting local ballot measure up in Gainesville too, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, sir. So this is the local public utilities referendum, and so for some background, for over 100 years, the city of Gainesville has owned a utility, which we proudly put on our main electric power plant right in downtown that says owned by the people it serves. It serves the city of Gainesville with electric, water, wastewater, natural gas, and telecommunications. We are one of the largest municipal utilities in the country. And so, as I said, for over 100 years, we've been expanding, investing, working within this system. In the 2023 legislative session, A bill came forward sponsored by State Representative Chuck Clemens and then supported strongly by Keith Perry in the Senate that took that utility completely away from the residents of the city of Gainesville and gave it to Governor Ron DeSantis, similar to what happened with Walt Disney, similar to, I was actually just at an Andrew Warren fundraiser last night, similar to that sort of thing. It was completely taken from the residents. And what they did is they created a board that was appointed by the governor to oversee this. It still remains a part of the city of Gainesville. So they still own the land underneath it. They own the over $2 billion in assets that the utility, and they provide service to the 100,000 customers that are within the service area. But has no accountability to the local residents. It's completely appointed by the governor. There is nothing like it anywhere else in the United States of America. It is a completely unique system, right? Really unique for cities across the United States. I mean, the whole concept of a city, of a government, of a state, of a federal government is that the people of that area get to determine who represents them. Those people can then appoint boards, they can do various things, but everything flows from the people to their elected representatives through the government that is supposed to represent them. And so there's nothing quite like this anywhere. Because it was a part of our city charter, we were able to put it on the ballot and change it under state law to say that we are completely striking this from our charter. The original one went through the takeover with no vote of the residents, but now we're putting it on the ballot to ask the residents, would you like to strike this article that was created by the legislature that creates this board, or would you like to keep it? So a yes vote means yes, eliminate the governor appointed board. A no vote means keep it the way it is, where the governor is appointing the people that are overseeing our utility.
That makes sense. That bill has struck me as one of the more radical attempts at a preemption that we've seen, where you've essentially taken, a power company owned by local taxpayers and taking control of it away from those local taxpayers and now giving it to the governor. Can you tell us a bit about the backstory? What was the sense of why that happened? Why did the governor, or why did Chuck Clemens and Keith Perry feel so strongly about taking control of Gainesville's utility away from the city of Gainesville?
It's been an ongoing controversy since long before I came on. I mean, quite frankly, I was sworn in January 2023, and this whole thing started February 2023. So all of this is before my time. But for as long as we've had a utility, it's been controversial. And I do think that utilities can be controversial. No one likes paying their utility bill. People want the electricity, they want the water, they want the wastewater. But I think it engenders, a lot of frustration with people. We've had in it, but it's been used as sort of a political back and forth for many, many years in Gainesville, where some candidates will run saying the other guys didn't do this right, that's why your utility bill is high, and the other folks say no, they didn't do it right, that's why your utility bill is high. In 2018, Chuck Clemens and Keith Perry went forward with a similar bill in which they would create an appointed board, but it would be appointed by the Gainesville City Commission. That went on the ballot. Hundreds of thousands of dollars was put into it. It was all during that same time period that you have written so much about. Right. Florida Power and Light was secretly funneling money. Same year that they were funneling money to a ghost candidate that was coming out of Gainesville that they named Charles Gostin in order to siphon votes away from Kaiser Enneking. That same year, hundreds of thousands of dollars coming through the Republican Party of Florida was coming through to try to pass that ballot measure. That we were able to beat that 60-40 in that year. And then it all kind of died. The people had spoken. They did not want an independent board. They wanted to directly elect the people that were going to oversee their utility. We thought at that point this was basically done, but Chuck Clemens was the Speaker Pro Tem this year. Keith Perry was termed out. Keith Perry was on his very last session as a legislator, and they decided to put this bill forward at that point, knowing that with the power that they had accumulated over that time.
No, keep going.
And so that's really what it comes down to. We have been in a fight with them. They have been wanting this particular thing for a very, very long time, though they've always wanted it structured in the way that OUC is structured, JEA is structured, in which you will have the local elected officials appointing the people that are on that board, which has some level of accountability. It separates it out from the politics a little bit. There's some level of accountability, and reasonable people can disagree as to, is it better for the person deciding what happens to utility to be directly accountable to the voters or indirectly by an appointed position? What I don't think anyone can argue is, does it make any sense for a governor with no accountability to the local residents to be appointing the people that decide what happens with their utility?
Right.
To me, it goes against the basic tenets of what a democracy is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's an entirely preposterous setup to begin with. And so I should be careful about how I ask this, but we know just what lengths Florida Power and Light went to in its attempt to buy JEA, the publicly owned utility up in Jacksonville. We also know, like you mentioned, that FPL funded a bunch of election schemes that helped Keith Perry in particular get elected. These are documented facts at this point. And I remember when this legislation suddenly surfaced late in the session, there was a lot of speculation at the time that this was all about setting the table for the DeSantis administration to essentially privatize GRU and to FPL specifically. Do you have any sense of how real is that concern? Has there been any sort of indication that FPL is sniffing around it, or Duke or any other private utility company?
I don't like to speculate as to what actions people took behind closed doors. I can say that the new board has come out, and the CEO, which I can go into that backstory, who was a political appointee, they fired a long-term employee and put him in. He has come out and most recently in the last few weeks said that they no longer want to invest in power generation. He has said explicitly that we need to move out of generating our own power at GRU. So very clearly, I want to buy bulk power from either Florida Power and Light, Duke, or FMEA. So they are very clearly moving in the direction of having our customers serviced through a privatized method where we are no longer doing our own power. Yeah. I think that you would have to be very naive to think that someone like Florida Power and Light, Duke, or Florida Municipal Power Association is not watching very carefully and saying, well, how do we take advantage of this? How do we make this work? But I've not spoken with any of those people. I don't know that for a fact, and I don't want to publicly speculate. But clearly the direction that they are moving in is one in which we are no longer generating our own power, and we are going to these outside entities to do that.
Right. That strikes me as a very relevant detail in all of this. Scott Maxwell, the columnist at the Orlando Sentinel, one of my good friends, he had a column recently about the city of Winter Park and how well it did during the hurricanes, in part because it has undergrounded all of its power lines. And one of the reasons it was able to do that was years ago, they decided to essentially create a just take over their own utility and have a municipal utility of their own, where they were able to take all the profits they earned from that, and instead of paying it out as dividends to shareholders, they were able to put that back into the business and pay for undergrounding. And it struck me as like a really sort of strong argument in favor of public power. But I guess I wanted to ask you that same question, sort of in your mind, this referendum to keep GRU under local control. Why is that so important in your view?
I mean, it's not the kind of thing that you notice when you're walking around a city because it is so in the weeds. But when you start digging into all of the things that we love about Gainesville and that we care about in Gainesville, the municipal utilities there, utilities are everywhere. You get kind of blind to it, but everywhere you walk, look above you, you're going to see electric lines. That is right of way that you own. Those are sitting on. If you look down, there's water lines that run underneath every single road. The money that is coming into the government will either be coming in through taxes and then dividends to shareholders, or it's coming back into the city or reinvesting in beautification measures. And so much of our city, so we're very proud to be a tree city here in Gainesville. That you have to be very cautious on how you're trimming trees for electric lines, how you're cutting roots to make sure that it's not going into water. You have to balance those two things out, right? And that means balancing out the needs of the community with your electric utility. We have been some of the best parks in Gainesville, from Depot Park to some of our best trails. A lot of those are stitched together through land that is owned by the utility for one purpose that we were then able to utilize as a park. Sweetwater Wetlands Park is my favorite park in town. It's similar to, I think it's Orlando Wetlands area.
Yeah, right.
Is that something similar? OUC is also a municipal utility. Now that's my favorite park in town. If anyone comes in, the birding is amazing in that section. But all of that comes from being able to say, okay, the utility is spending money over here, the city is spending money over here. We want similar things. How can we make these two things work together? And I think it's worked out very, very well for our city. You go to Tallahassee, they have a really great multi-use trail that multi-use trails are very well connected in Tallahassee, and they run directly under the utility lines. when you go to places where utilities and the city are merged together into one, you start seeing these little details of all this stuff that just makes quality of life a little bit better. And that's what it's about. It also saves you money. You no longer have two separate administrations. You have one administration that is able to move together in one fluid motion forward. And so I think it's very important.
That makes sense. And the last thing I wanted to ask you about this is just to get a sense of how this campaign is going. And I was particularly interested, I've been spending far more time than I ever envisioned the last few weeks, kind of digging into the DeSantis administration's just like deranged campaigns, taxpayer funded campaigns against the two citizen led constitutional amendments on the ballot, the Amendment 4 to overturn the abortion ban and Amendment 3 to legalize marijuana. I think if I'm understanding correct, I've been dealing with something a little bit similar in Gainesville, where GRU is spending public resources. The GRU that is still controlled by DeSantis appointees is spending public resources against your referendum. Is that right? Just walk me through what's going on there and just how the campaign is going.
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, the legislature passed a law that prohibited local governments from spending money on any referendum. Obviously, they didn't do that for the state, which is why Ron DeSantis
Right.
feels very comfortable.
Do as I say, not as I do.
But it's very explicit for local governments. Everyone in their GRU bill received a pamphlet that was ostensibly trying to just be a compare contrast, but like many compare contrasts, made the yes vote seem beautiful, and a no vote or a yes vote seem like what you wanted to do. A no vote, is where you didn't want to go.
Right.
And so kind of pushing people in the direction that they wanted. That's explicitly against state law. It's 106.113 is very, very clear. You cannot spend any ratepayer money against this. But this is the problem. So much of what we have structured in the state of Florida is the idea. You have accountability to the electorate in some capacity, right? So an ethics board might be able to levy a fine with the idea that, okay, well, when you levy a fine against a public employee, obviously that employee is probably not going to be here much longer, but they don't have the authority to remove them. When you have this board that is completely unaccountable to the residents can't vote them out. The residents they don't really have much say in it. It's really hard to know what any of this means. So yeah, they clearly broke the law, but where do we go from that with there? And that's sort of across the board. They've made a number of decisions, from eliminating net metering to stop veterans programs and small business programs, things that are clearly unpopular with the people in our local community that care about those things. But there's just no accountability.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's those sort of steps like that, I always sort of suspect are designed to seed the ground for privatization too. It's trying to make people more irritated or less happy with their publicly owned utility and sort of build support in the long run to sell it off to FPL or whoever.
Well, we know that's what they did with JEA.
Exactly.
JEA, they explicitly stopped net metering to make the numbers look better for a sale. That all happened in the lead up to it.
That's right. And I actually lied. I had one more question about this, just because I find this as one of the most delicious details in the whole thing when I was reading about it. So when the legislature passed this law giving the governor control of GRU, the governor's office made sure to, because it is always thinking about, it's always on brand, made sure to include some anti-ESG language in the legislation. I don't have it in front of me, but it basically says that GRU can only consider economic factors. It can't consider like social, political, governance factors, the environmental factors in any of its decisions, right? And it was all a way to grandstand on, make this a culture war thing too. And incidentally, language that the DeSantis administration has been shopping, trying to get enforced on even all utilities in Florida, including FPL, who, interestingly, it has not happened that way, where the big investor-owned utilities are probably pushing back. But anyway, so they've got this language in there, and now GRU is trying to stop this campaign to stop this referendum legally. The city has made some pretty interesting arguments that these very anti-ESG, anti-woke rules that meant to control what the utility can do prevent it from actually trying to stop this referendum from happening. Can you just sort of walk through that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So the law states very clearly that they are explicitly prohibited from considering, quote, the furtherance of social, political, or ideological interests. And I think they had a very specific idea on that, like they normally do, which is, I guess, overspending, like spending money on solar or some other thing.
It's the legal way to say, don't say climate change.
Right. But in this instance, there's nothing more political than a referendum that is on the ballot to be voted on by the electorate. And so it's,
Right.
it's just, yes, it's very ironic. We'll, we'll see. There's a lawsuit on Tuesday to see whether or not this will get counted, whether or not a judge puts a stay on it, whether or not we're going to be in a very long proceeding following this, or whether we will know within the next week that everything is good to go and the votes will count at that time. That's one of the arguments that they made, is that they do not have the authority to make this because they cannot be considering political. And I think it's a strong argument. They cannot consider, this is, by the definition of politics, this is political.
Right. I mean, we've seen conservative courts around the state constantly weaponizing the idea of standing to stop people from holding public officials accountable. So here's a classic standing issue. If you're not allowed to do anything political, you've got no standing to be filing a lawsuit like this. So, well, we'll definitely check back in to see how that turns out. Well, I've got you here. I also wanted to ask you about some of the stuff Gainesville is doing around single family zoning. I mentioned earlier that we had a guy on this show, or just recorded an interview with the guy behind the rural boundary amendment. He's also a leader with Orlando YIMBY, the Yes in My Backyard movement. And when we were talking about sort of what some of the proactive things communities can do to try and create housing abundance, I think was the term he used. He specifically mentioned some of the changes Gainesville is making. And so I was hoping to learn a little bit more about that. Maybe tell me a bit about what Gainesville is doing on the kind of the YIMBY front.
Well, I'm really happy that folks around the state are talking about it. It feels like we've been sort of in our corner, kind of slowly but surely taking this issue on. Starting in about 2018, our very first push to reform single family zoning came forward. I think we were among some of the first in the country to do it. Minneapolis was doing some things at that time period. Austin was doing some things at that time period. Other college towns, it seems to be college towns are really taking this on, trying to find solutions to this. That failed spectacularly in 2018. Tremendous community pushback at that point.
Right.
And so from there, we sort of have been taking it one at a time with, kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of approach. But some of the things that we passed since then are the allowance of something called accessory dwelling units. So you can have, you have your home, and then you are allowed to have a smaller home that is toward the back that kind of has the same look and feel to it. And that allows someone to have their grandparents live in the back. Or I know as a young professional, we lived in a lot of these accessory dwelling units that existed from before they were legalized. So someone, when I was in my 20s, all of our friends were trying to live in the beautiful historic neighborhoods of Gainesville. We obviously didn't have the money to afford a 3-2 house, but someone's accessory dwelling unit in the back was perfect for a single person that was in there. And I was in the same boat. I lived in one of those, made me fall in love with the city, made me want to stay around, made me fall in love with the neighborhoods of Gainesville. We about 2 years ago, passed the elimination of parking minimums. So in most cities, you'll have, when a new building gets built, it is required that you build X amount of parking. It doesn't matter if it's an urban area, it doesn't matter if it's a suburban area. There's no context to it. You just have to build this amount of parking. And in some areas, that makes a lot of sense. If you're in a suburban context, people are going to be driving, they're going to be going, but it doesn't make sense always everywhere across the city. So by eliminating those parking minimums, we're essentially saying the builder can decide what makes sense for whatever their building is. I think we are the only city in the state of Florida, and possibly in the Southeast, that has completely eliminated that.
Oh, wow.
And then the big one we just passed a couple of weeks ago, which is one that I've been working on for the last 2 years, which is comprehensively rethinking how we do our single family zoning. The single family zoning is the requirement that you'll have one detached home with a large yard. There's certain setback requirements. It's basically suburban style zoning. So what we did is we kept single family zoning in place. Well, let me go back a little bit. In 2022, we passed, I would say, the first complete elimination of single family zoning in the Southeast. It was allowed quadruplexes on any lot, a drastic reduction in the minimum lot sizes. It was a really bold reform.
Yeah, this got national attention.
It got national attention. We were highlighted by Strong Towns as a city leading the charge on single family zoning reform. In my very first meeting in January, that was done on a 4-3 vote, and then on my first meeting it went the other way. It was a 4-3 vote from the opposite direction. There was an election at that same time. At that point, it was clear that we needed to do something to move the ball forward. And so for the last 2 years, I was trying to figure out what kind of compromises and how do we get to somewhere, because the way our current zoning is working is just not working for families. You needed to have 0.28 acres in order to just build a single family home with a large yard. I'm I'm at an age, I'm 35 years old. I have a 4-year-old. We're around a lot of other families with young children. So many people in my generation just cannot find homes that they can afford to get that first starter home, to get them into a house, to help them build equity and move forward with their lives, and that American dream that we all grew up learning about. So forcing us to have these kind of luxury amenities like a large yard that at 0.28 acres is about double the size of what nationally new homes are being.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We're sort of forcing people to have a type of home that they are not looking for and spending more money than is required. And so we're able to get down to, we passed a comprehensive rezoning that took all of the wonky parts of our single family zoning code. There used to be 4 separate single family zones. We collapsed that down into one, brought that down to from 0.28 to 0.08 acres. So basically you have lots of flexibility for what size lot you're going to build a single family home on, reduced setbacks. Something I'm very proud of, and I think it's something that we'll see over the course of time, not immediately, but over the course of time, you'll start seeing that as new homes come down, you'll get more homes in their place that are these smaller starter homes, as opposed to, larger McMansion style homes that you tend to see in urban areas that are growing the way that Gainesville is. And so that was my personal reform. But I think Gainesville has been on the front lines of this for quite a while. And I think our zoning code is great. I'm happy to hear folks in Orlando are being inspired by it and talking to you about it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So a couple of things. One, first of all, the history you laid out there, where Gainesville tried to eliminate single family only zoning, that for my money became one of the sort of most interesting but least covered political stories of the last couple of years. And I include myself in failing to pay enough attention to it at the time. But if memory serves, Gainesville did that, and then before these elections that sort of changed the composition of the board, the DeSantis administration went to court to try and to stop it, to overturn that decision. It ultimately became moot because of the way the elections went and the new board sort of backing down. But did you ever get a sense of why was the DeSantis administration pushing against it? I remember at the time it was like confusing even some conservative think tanks, because generally speaking, sort of economic conservatives don't really like zoning restrictions and stuff, which are constraints on supply. They'd prefer just let the private market figure out what the market wants and needs. Did you ever get a sense of what some of those political dynamics were?
Well, I mean, it not to state the obvious or to be too crude about it, but we are a blue city.
Right.
And so it is funny that even as we do things that I think are bipartisan and, loosening the restrictions that private homeowners have on their private land seems to me to be a very classical, conservative,
right,
free market way of doing things. But so in this instance, it is the right way to do things, but we are a blue city doing it. And so everything ends up being sucked into the culture wars, whether it's right or wrong, like philosophically on one side or the other, which is a shame. I would love to see us get into a point where we're just trying to figure out how to get to the right answer, not just how do we get into our political parties. What was most bizarre to me about the Ron DeSantis administration's lawsuit was, one, they sued, but their reasoning for suing was odd. So they don't really have standing to sue. They would have to show that there's some kind of compelling state interest to sue. And their argument is that they are the ones under state law, the administration, to do the governor's office to oversee affordable housing. And affordable housing in that context means subsidized housing for low income people. And so essentially the argument is that by allowing the free market to work more, you would be hurting their ability to do what actually creates affordable housing, which is have the government spend more money on affordable housing. So essentially it was the opposite of a sort of free market approach. It was their argument was that that the only way to create affordable housing is to have the government spend money on it, not to let the free market do what it's going to do, which was culture wars just get people into funny positions. The person who was the head of the Department of Economic Opportunity is no longer there. I'd like to think he got a dressing down when some of the libertarian think tanks came forward and said, what is the Ron DeSantis administration doing here? Because it was frankly bizarre. It was odd.
Yeah, yeah. I was just looking for a fight, like you said, with a blue city. It seems like that. The last thing I wanted to ask you about this, but ultimately that suit became moot when this was the subject of elections, and a new commission, like you said, came in and ended up flipping the vote and backing down on this issue. And it speaks, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it speaks to sort of one of the challenges here, that a lot of existing homeowners become like really opposed to zoning changes under, oftentimes it's couched in ideas like this will hurt my property values, whether it will or not. I've sort of jokingly said on the newsletter that like the biggest rent seeking lobby of all in Florida is existing homeowners. But obviously, you mentioned you spent a lot of time trying to get to the point of passing the reforms that you just did. I assume a lot of that was work trying to sort of educate and get people sort of on board with more of this. I keep calling it the YIMBY mindset, but how did you do that? How did you sort of work from what seems like it was a pretty clear backlash among at least a lot of residents, and how did you get them to the point where they were on board with some of what you're doing now?
Well, if I can brag for a moment, the neighborhood group that came out that was created specifically to oppose the last zoning reforms actually came out in favor of these new zoning
Oh,
reforms, which
wow.
was not something I expected. I mean, we literally tripled the density of our residential neighborhoods
Wow.
overnight, and they came out in favor of it. And that was partially because I'd say the number one thing with that is we've been having these conversations for 6-7 years, and so it's kind of nice for me to be able to sort of run the touchdown in at the last minute. But I mean, a lot of other folks had to fight very, very long battles their entire terms in office, have their terms end for, run the ball down the other 90 yards before we were able to get this in there. By the time we had come forward with this, it was a compromise, even though I think
Right.
it is, in my opinion, the best single family zoning code in the Southeast United States. It was still a compromise from what we had from before. But geez, I mean, there was so many community meetings where, I had to sit in front of people that were very, very angry with me, and I had to try to calmly explain, the quality of life benefits, the benefits to them. I'm glad you're asking this question, because I think it's important for folks to like that recognize that people are people. People are risk averse about their neighborhoods. People are
Hmm.
risk averse about their homes. Not just because someone is opposed to you does not mean that they are necessarily NIMBYs. And you just have to
Right.
kind of, if you want to change these things, try to you can work together as a community to get them done. You are likely to have to make compromises. That's just what it means to be an elected official in government. Sometimes you compromise and you work on things, but you can get things through. But it was 2 years of a lot of conversations and a lot of work and a lot of smiling while people yelled at you and saying, it's okay, I understand, let's get through this. But as I said, most importantly, we started the conversations early. We failed a number of times, and that was really critical to getting us to that point. And I think that's true with Austin was in a similar boat in 2018. They tried to pass Code Next. That failed, and they started taking these smaller, more piecemeal approaches, and they passed a similar minimum lot size reform law just a month before we did. St. Paul, Minnesota was in a similar fight while Minnesota was doing theirs. They're able to pass good things. If the community wants to do this, you just need to start the conversations. And it's gonna take some time. It's gonna be long, but now at least you have roadmaps in a way that we didn't, 6 years ago, to see how other cities have been able to do this and how they've been able to get to yes on getting a good zoning code in place.
That makes sense. Well, here's hoping Tallahassee doesn't turn around and immediately undo it all next year.
Well, what's interesting about Tallahassee is ever since those times when the Ron DeSantis administration sued us, they later came out when the Live Local Act was passed, and Ron
Right.
DeSantis said, we have to pass the Live Local Act. These liberal cities aren't building enough housing and multifamily
Right.
housing. And it's like, you just sued us, Governor
Right.
DeSantis, because you
Right.
said we were building too much multifamily housing. But,
Yeah.
it does seem like there's been some coming around by the legislature to say, okay, like we do have to take this seriously. The Republicans are the ones in power. They are
Right.
responsible for how the state is going. And affordable housing is the number one issue in Florida. I mean, you have to give real credible solutions to this problem. I can't turn to my constituents and say that I'm not going to use the tools that I have in my toolkit for the biggest issue they have. And I think the legislature's in a similar boat. So hopefully we're rowing in the same direction a little bit better now, but we'll see.
What a refreshing change of pace that would be. Bryan Eastman, thank you for joining the show. This was fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care. All right. Thank you again to Bryan Eastman. And also thanks again to Eric Grimmer. I sort of feel like these two guys ought to meet each other if they haven't already. As always, before we go, make sure to click those like and subscribe buttons. And if you've got any thoughts on this show, any others we've done, or you got any, you want us to have other subjects you want to see us tackle, or whatever the case may be, make sure to leave a comment. We'll check it out. Okay. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you again soon.